Chapter 1, Star of Magic. At the north pole of the Mediterranean mainland, a massive sheet of ice upon the frozen sea had grown to a thickness greater than 5 miles. On top of this ice sheet was a town made entirely out of ice. In reality, this town was the well-functioning mage guild. To have built a guild in such a freezing cold place must have been nothing short of arduous. The average temperature year-round was below freezing, 20 degrees below freezing, to be exact. On sunny days, no signs of greenery could be seen. Even the most tenacious magical plants did not want to grow here. The only exception was at the center of the mage guild. At the bottom of the magical tower was a huge statue. Surrounding the statue was a small garden. This was a forbidden place within the mage guild. The statue was rumored to have been built in the likeness of the lord of the Mediterranean mainland, Selene. He was also the first ever dean of the mage guild. However, none of the students had ever seen him. Right from the initial establishment of the guild, this dean had become a legendary figure. The perimeter of the garden surrounding the statue was only 100 meters wide. The temperature in the garden was above the freezing point, and because its surroundings were always foggy, only the face of the statue was visible. Within the garden, a little girl in her teens was watering the plants with a jade bottle. Hundreds of droplets sprinkled out evenly onto the soil as the water was poured out of the bottle. The barefooted girl, clad in a long skirt, stood out prominently in this icy landscape. In the distance, whenever students walked past, someone would comment, "How pitiful." A prerequisite for admission to the Mage Guild was that those who were grade 9 mages or higher had to continue their pursuits of the secrets of the world of magic. In the Mediterranean mainland, being a grade 9 mage did not mean much aside from signifying that one was a determined person who possessed strong perseverance. The little girl's wordless movements attracted the pity of many mages, but none of them were aware of the impact it had on their own mental state. Each time such a situation occurred, a hint of a smile would appear on the little girl's lips. And afterwards, a beautiful young lady would appear to berate her. "Myers, do your work properly." The girl, whose name was Myers, would bow her head pitifully and continue her work. Myers was indeed quite pitiful like this, but nobody dared rebuke that young lady, for whoever did so would suffer bad luck. Being left naked and freezing in the icy parade square was considered the lightest punishment. Some people just disappeared into thin air, never to be seen again. Those people had been punished for their disrespect towards the young lady. The young lady was a notorious devil within the guild. It was rumored that she had close ties to the dean. There was no shortage of courageous beings on the Mediterranean mainland. It was just that it was rumored that Myers contained a devil sealed in her body, and that the one to cast this spell had been a mythical beast hidden in the frozen sea. The guild released numerous missions every year, and there was only one mission that none of the students had been able to accomplish: to expel this devil, which involved the killing of that beast and the collection of its blood to purify the little girl. Ding, dong. The melodious bell rang. The guild became lively as many mages from the lower grades rushed excitedly to Water Element Hall to join in the fun. The grade 9 mages, the students of the lowest grade, behaved like chattering little girls. It was not surprising, for since the guild's establishment a few thousand years ago, a star of magic had appeared less than 10 times. There had not been a single one in the last 300 years. A star of magic not only needed to possess a unique bloodline and the ability to inherit powerful magic, but also needed to have powerful abilities in control, be skilled in alchemy, and make equipment by themselves in order to accomplish 12 different guild missions. These criteria by themselves were only the beginning of the selection of a star of magic, and many students were able to meet them. The outstanding masters found by this process were subsequently enrolled into the Arctic Guild. This time, the manner in which the magic bell rang was unique. It rang 3 times in succession, with 13 tones each time. This meant that the newly emerged star of magic was a grade 13 student. In the Arctic Guild, the regular grade 9 students could graduate upon completing grade 12. However, they had the option of not leaving the guild and advancing their education as seniors instead. The seniors were in grade 13 to grade 15, with grade 13 being the lowest. That being said, the Star of Magic this time was a grade 13 senior. So far, the highest grade to complete all the Star of Magic missions, as well as the final selection, had been grade 15. There were not many people in the hall, only about 300. The dean appeared in the middle of the platform. Francis was a grade 16 mage. It was said that Francis' aptitude had been average, but since he had followed the first Dean Celine and received meticulous guidance, he had made significant achievements today. However, this had not hindered Francis from becoming the idol of the students. He had lived for thousands of years and had participated in many great battles to bring peace to the Golden Plains. It was said that the evil mage of the Golden Plains was very powerful, and because he had offered his soul to the devil, he had a body that feared nothing. With a head of short golden hair, Francis looked like he was 30-something years old. He looked at the young girl standing in front of him and said, "Mephisto, you are the first grade 13 student since the establishment of the Arctic Guild to have been awarded the Star of Magic. Here is your badge." The young lady mage, Mephisto, gladly received the badge. On this badge, there was a blemish in the shape of a lightning bolt. Why was it broken? Francis noticed Mephisto's puzzled look and said, "Mephisto, the history of this seal dates back to the ancient times of the First Empire. In addition, the Honorable Mage Celine used this badge as a symbol to represent his Metatron clan." Mephisto held on tightly to the badge in shock, fearing that Francis would confiscate it. Although the Metatron clan had bowed out of the historical stage, Metatron City still existed as the Holy Land on the mainland. Items that Celine had used at the beginning of his journey had become treasures to mages. There were many legends regarding this badge, and the most astounding one was that hidden in this badge was great power. The mighty Celine had used this badge to slay countless evil gods in order to make the Metatron mainland a land of freedom. Surely, that was just a legend. Mephisto regarded Celine as her idol. The meaning behind this badge far outweighed its power 1,000,000 times over. There were whispers amongst the people in the hall. Everyone envied Mephisto, a talented young lady who had in 10 years progressed from grade 10 to grade 13. She was considered to be the most outstanding master over the last few hundred years. Despite the fact that her grade was still considered low within the Arctic Guild, her power was equivalent to that of a grade 12 mage master during the 5th dynasty. "Mephisto, do you have any requests?" Francis looked at the young lady, pleased. Despite her inherent flaws having limited her to the practice of water magic, she had attained such astounding results so early on. As her perseverance had enabled her to acquire the highly challenging element conversion skill, it was a most appropriate time for her to have progressed to this point. "Request?" "Yes. As you are the winner among the 12 students, you have the privilege of making a request." Mephisto was ecstatic. She knew that although only she had received the Star of Magic, the other 11 students would also be honored. She was merely the lucky one. "I wish to enter the magical element tower to practice." "Sure, not a problem." "Humph," a cold voice was heard. It came from a student waiting behind her. He had been defeated by grade 13 Mephisto in the battle. It had been by accident. He was very depressed, a grade 15 master having been defeated by a grade 13 master. To others, it was an honor to be a runner-up, but to him, it was pure humiliation. "Congratulations, Adam. You have achieved the good result of being the runner-up in the Star of Magic selection. The guild has decided to award you with this. Please treasure it." Francis was not bothered by Adam's attitude. Mages were better off as mage controllers if they did not have their personality. Francis took out a magic wand. Upon seeing the wand, Adam was appeased. Francis had not been lying. The reward for the runner-up, actually, was better than that of the winners. It was a composite magic wand which had been refined using mysterious means and held a large dragon's heart within it. The dragon's heart had not been polished, but its 64 facets were evenly distributed. This was indeed a huge dragon's heart, usually meant for only grade 16 or above. Adam, you may also make a request. Adam was taken aback, and then replied happily, Dean, sir, I hope to set the little girl free. Little girl? Francis was momentarily dumbfounded. Yes. Myers, the pitiful Myers. Tears almost welled up in Adam's eyes as he thought of the pitiful damsel imprisoned within the garden, allegedly for a few thousand years now. The devil in her body had been none of her business. The devil within her had nothing to do with her. This is impossible. Dean, you said that I could make a request without restriction. Adam, your request should not be against my will, right? Adam looked at the Dean, puzzled. He could not understand why for the Dean, this was a difficult matter to resolve. That Myers is not under my custody. She is someone else's personal property, Francis said with a smile. Chapter 2. The Last Metatron, Part 1. The northern port of the Psychikinya Empire, Ceylon City. A sudden rainstorm was pouring down through the gap of the fort. The sky was darkened as though it had been tinted with dragon's blood ink. Inside the harbor, the fishing boats cowered as huge waves forcefully struck the dam. With a crashing sound, the waves also created mist over 10 meters tall. As the rainwater accumulated and spread rapidly to the slums, the water on the streets deepened. The drainage system, which had not been maintained for at least 5 years, was inadequate. In an instant, the slums became a vast ocean. Ceylon City's Magnolia Bay was no longer how it had been in the past. The withering fishing industry provided limited income, and the Lord was powerless, unable to help. To improve the drainage system, they would need a mage well-versed in alchemy, as well as many of his numerous disciples. It would cost thousands of gold coins just for them to prepare the drawing. No mage had appeared in Ceylon City in the last 200 years, and the Municipal Services Department had nearly become just for show. Lightning tore across the sky, followed by rolling thunder. As the lightning danced in the sky, it illuminated the stormy city. On the empty streets, a youth about 10 years of age was struggling to move forward against the water. This youth, who was very skinny and weak, had short brown unruly hair. The rain splashed past his eyelashes, causing him to keep his eyes closed. As he breathed out a faint white vapor from his nose, his legs trembled non-stop. He hugged an oil paper packet tightly. It contained all the food he had begged for that day. Bang! A loud clap of thunder. The youth could no longer hold on and fell to the ground. With his face submerged in the water, he immediately started to choke and cough. He struggled vehemently, desperately wanting to stand up again. However, his thin weak body could no longer withstand it. He turned over and passed out. In his unconscious state, his hand still gripped the oil paper packet tightly. The sky finally cleared after 2 hours of the intense rainstorm. As the flood water slowly receded, pedestrians began to appear on the streets. The unconscious youth was flushed over to some eaves under a roof, his body against the stone. The door pushed open. A person dressed like a servant saw the unconscious youth, ran up to him, and gave him a forceful kick. He shouted angrily, "Beggar, get lost. Don't die here." His voice was sharp and chilling, closely resembling that of a Tangulasi Empire palace eunuch who had been castrated. The kick caused the youth to wake up moaning. This was followed by a bout of severe coughing. He felt warm and realized that he had a fever. Subconsciously, his hands were still holding onto the oil paper packet tightly. He heaved a sigh of relief and turned over before crawling 2 steps away. Then, he struggled to open his oil paper packet. The oil paper packet contained aged rice that had turned moldy. He had planned to cook it at home before eating it. However, he could not wait any longer, because if he still did not eat anything, he would not have energy to even walk. The aged grains tasted like sand in his mouth, disintegrating as they were chewed and swallowed into his stomach. Unlucky. The fierce-looking servant saw that the youth really could not get up on his feet and spat at him forcefully before turning around and going through the door. The youth laid on the ice-cold ground and forced himself to wolf down the remaining half-portion of raw rice. Then he got back onto his feet unsteadily, and without turning back, walked towards the east of the city. His house was situated at the outskirts of the city. If he did not reach his home before the sky turned dark, a subsequent rainstorm could cause him to freeze to death on the streets. A plump businessman walked out of the bright red door behind him. He was wearing poor quality silk, and his hair was oiled. He looked like he had been drenched in the rain. Wait, isn't that the kid from the Metatron clan? What was his name again? The plump, sharp-eyed businessman looked at the back of the youth as he asked this to the two servants behind him. Celine, master. His name is Celine. The servant gave a toad-like laugh, sounding like a chicken being strangled. The wretched-looking trio of master and servants looked at the youth in an unfriendly manner. Why is he not dead? Who knows? No idea which jerk was willing to give him food, the other servant answered angrily. Hey, you two, monitor him closely. Should he die, buy the house immediately, lest anyone else takes the opportunity, the plump businessman instructed. He twisted his heavy body and walked in the other direction. Noted, master, the servants replied as they carefully followed behind him. The two of them were almost able to hide in the shadow of the plump businessman. In the chilly night, the youth named Celine dragged his exhausted body out of Ceylon City. He carried the oil paper packet, left the main road, and limped back to his ancestral home. This enormous stone house was the last asset of the Metatron clan. Celine pushed the door open and entered the house shakily. The stone walls, covered with green moss, exuded a wintry feel. All the windows in this two-story house had no glass in them, making the lonely stone house seem eerie and desolate. Celine gasped for air. He was finally home. He practically crawled up the stairs to his bedroom and lay his head against the bedboard. The bedboard was like the wall, wet, cold, and stiff. His clothing, which had been drenched by the rain, had been half-dried by the strong winds on his journey home. It was now stuck to his body. It was Celine's one and only piece of clothing. Celine struggled to push himself up, removed his clothes, and lay on the bedboard. The oil paper packet was placed next to his head. He felt a sharp pain at his waist and turned his head to take a look. It had been badly bruised. This had been from the kick from that servant. Celine grit his teeth as he lay down. The pain would disappear if he was asleep. The moonlight and cold breeze that trickled into the room were hardly poetic. Celine felt as though his body was burning, and there was a splitting pain in his head. It was possible that he would lose his life if the fever persisted. He struggled to climb out of his bed and pulled out a box from beneath the bed. The lock on the box had long since been dismantled. The silver lock had been traded for a week's worth of food. No one had been willing to buy the pest-proof camphor wooden box, and Celine had every intention of using it to start a fire one day. In the box was a messy pile of collection slips, most of them being debt-related documents. Celine fished out a metal badge and stuck it onto his forehead. The coolness seeped through his forehead and he felt as though his headache was waning. Celine sat on the floor and wept as he looked at the box full of collection slips. The Metatron clan had been a noble tribe, and the honorable name had been a sign of fortune in the northern part of the empire. By the time of Celine's generation, the Metatron clan had been left with nothing. The pile of collection slips had become useless pieces of paper. The debtors who had owed money back then had since passed away, and major shifts of power and wars had caused the gradual decline of the Metatron family. If the debtors had still been alive and had repaid him the amounts indicated on the collection slips, Celine would have been able to buy Ceylon City 10 times over. The badge, which was pressed upon Celine's forehead, was a symbol of the Metatron clan. Celine had not attempted to sell the palm-sized badge, as like the collection slips, it had been left to him by his father. Celine's parents had both died when he was 6 years old, leaving him the box and ancestral home. Celine had not been able to make a living for himself at the tender age of 6, and had needed to sell the things in the house in order to feed himself. Scheming businessmen had taken advantage of his situation to make money. What would a 6-year-old boy know? Within half a year, Celine had sold almost everything in the house. Although Celine was already 12 years old, he looked more like a 10-year-old since he was malnourished, skinny, and weak. Celine had not sold the ancestral home. It was not that he had not wanted to, but property transactions needed to be processed at City Hall and could not be falsified. The greedy businessmen who were eyeing his property preferred to wait until Celine starved to death. Upon his death, the property would not have an owner. Then, they would be able to buy the land for next to nothing. Celine's will to survive was very strong, and he had managed to last to the age of 12 through begging. Celine fell onto the bed. The family badge had sent coolness through his body, enough that the pain at his waist had lessened. Celine fell asleep, not knowing if he would wake up this time. Bang, bang, bang. Celine forced his eyes open and sat up. Sunlight streamed into the house through the window, the dirt on the floor evident. It was strange to have someone knocking on the door this early in the morning. Celine's ancestral home was not near any main roads, and was instead situated at the foot of a mountain across a spot of forest. Ever since he had sold everything in his home, no one had called upon him. Bang, bang, bang. The knocking at the door persisted. Celine jumped out of bed, feeling healthier and much lighter than before. He put the badge back into the box and shoved it under the bed before going downstairs to answer the door. Having been in a daze the night before, he had forgotten to lock the door. Fear suddenly gripped Celine. There were beasts in the area and he could have been devoured in his sleep if they had entered. The door opened with a shriek. Celine felt the warmth from the sun's rays as they streamed in. A middle-aged man was standing among the shadows of the trees. He had long black hair, wore a long gray robe, and held a wooden staff in his hand. This man could not have been more than 40 years of age. He had long, straight eyebrows that pointed upwards, and no beard. The hand holding the wooden staff was wearing a huge silver-black ring which was engraved with many complex symbols. Celine felt a little lost. The man had an odd appearance. Could he have been a high priest from the Roman Curia? His expression was very genial, but he had the air of a nobleman, as if that was simply how he was and it had nothing to do with anyone else. Life as a beggar had made Celine more sensitive. He knew the types of people he could approach versus the types he should avoid. But this man who had knocked on his door was different from the people of Ceylon City. He was standing right in front of Celine, and yet the youth could not feel his presence. The man smiled and asked Celine, "Where are the adults of the home?" This man must have come from a foreign land, because the people of Ceylon City knew of him as a jinx. Celine's inner voice quieted down as he rubbed his temples and answered, "There is no one else here." "Sir, may I know what is the matter?" Celine asked this politely, trying to appear at ease. To keep his life, he knew that he needed to get into the good books of the other party. This had been Celine's mantra in his 12 years of life experience. "Oh." The man looked at Celine, baffled. Celine had dashed down, topless and clad only in his shorts. He had a palm-sized mark on his forehead, left behind by the family badge. "This house is yours?" the man asked gently. "Yes." Celine looked down at the ground as his brown irises contracted. Could this man have been a bandit? "The thing is, I would like to buy this house. May I enter for a discussion?" "Buy the house?" Celine tried to reconcile with what he had just heard. He had long since planned to sell the house and then find a job in the city. He would not have minded work processing fish, as long as he could fill his stomach. However, he knew that apprentices were mostly given lodging instead of meals. If he had found work, he would have starved to death by the end of the first month. Celine turned to his side blankly and said, "Please come in." As the man stepped into the stone house, the dust beneath his feet disappeared, not leaving any imprints. There was a soft breeze, and the dampness in the living room instantly disappeared. Celine's heart fluttered with excitement, carefully calculating how much to sell the house for as he closed the door. The man glanced around the house, taking everything in. There was nothing in the house aside from its four walls, and there was nothing to admire. The man looked satisfied. He turned to Celine and asked, "You mentioned that this house is yours? Do you have the deed?" "I do." Celine nodded his head, but he did not return to the bedroom to retrieve the deed. As he had grown older, he realized that he had previously been cheated by those businessmen, and had learned to become more vigilant. The man smiled as he reached out his hand to stroke Celine's head, saying, "You need not worry. I am a mage and will not cheat you. Tell me, how many gold coins do you intend to sell this house for?" "Gold coins." Celine's eyes lit up. He had never seen gold coins, even after he had begun to sell the things in the house. The person who had taken his 4-foot oil painting had only left him a silver coin. The gold-plated lampstand, which had been exchanged for 2 silver coins, was considered a fair transaction. When he was 6, the businessman who had moved away the full set of cupboards had left Celine only 2 loaves of bread. Chapter 2. The Last Metatron, Part 1. A sudden rainstorm was pouring down through the gap of the fort. The sky was darkened as though it had been tinted with dragon's blood ink. Inside the harbor, the fishing boats cowered as huge waves forcefully struck the dam. With a crashing sound, the waves also created mist over 10 meters tall. As the rainwater accumulated and spread rapidly to the slums, the water on the streets deepened. The drainage system, which had not been maintained for at least 5 years, was inadequate. In an instant, the slums became a vast ocean. Ceylon City's Magnolia Bay was no longer how it had been in the past. The withering fishing industry provided limited income, and the Lord was powerless, unable to help. To improve the drainage system, they would need a mage well-versed in alchemy, as well as many of his numerous disciples. It would cost thousands of gold coins just for them to prepare the drawing. No mage had appeared in Ceylon City in the last 200 years, and the Municipal Services Department had nearly become just for show. Lightning tore across the sky, followed by rolling thunder. As the lightning danced in the sky, it illuminated the stormy city. On the empty streets, a youth about 10 years of age was struggling to move forward against the water. This youth, who was very skinny and weak, had short brown unruly hair. The rain splashed past his eyelashes, causing him to keep his eyes closed. As he breathed out a faint white vapor from his nose, his legs trembled non-stop. He hugged an oil paper packet tightly. It contained all the food he had begged for that day. Bang! A loud clap of thunder. The youth could no longer hold on and fell to the ground. With his face submerged in the water, he immediately started to choke and cough. He struggled vehemently, desperately wanting to stand up again. However, his thin weak body could no longer withstand it. He turned over and passed out. In his unconscious state, his hand still gripped the oil paper packet tightly. The sky finally cleared after 2 hours of the intense rainstorm. As the flood water slowly receded, pedestrians began to appear on the streets. The unconscious youth was flushed over to some eaves under a roof, his body against the stone. The door pushed open. A person dressed like a servant saw the unconscious youth, ran up to him, and gave him a forceful kick. He shouted angrily, "Beggar, get lost. Don't die here." His voice was sharp and chilling, closely resembling that of a Tangulasi Empire palace eunuch who had been castrated. The kick caused the youth to wake up moaning. This was followed by a bout of severe coughing. He felt warm and realized that he had a fever. Subconsciously, his hands were still holding onto the oil paper packet tightly. He heaved a sigh of relief and turned over before crawling 2 steps away. Then, he struggled to open his oil paper packet. The oil paper packet contained aged rice that had turned moldy. He had planned to cook it at home before eating it. However, he could not wait any longer, because if he still did not eat anything, he would not have energy to even walk. The aged grains tasted like sand in his mouth, disintegrating as they were chewed and swallowed into his stomach. Unlucky. The fierce-looking servant saw that the youth really could not get up on his feet and spat at him forcefully before turning around and going through the door. The youth laid on the ice-cold ground and forced himself to wolf down the remaining half-portion of raw rice. Then he got back onto his feet unsteadily, and without turning back, walked towards the east of the city. His house was situated at the outskirts of the city. If he did not reach his home before the sky turned dark, a subsequent rainstorm could cause him to freeze to death on the streets. A plump businessman walked out of the bright red door behind him. He was wearing poor quality silk, and his hair was oiled. He looked like he had been drenched in the rain. Wait, isn't that the kid from the Metatron clan? What was his name again? The plump, sharp-eyed businessman looked at the back of the youth as he asked this to the 2 servants behind him. Celine, master. His name is Celine. The servant gave a toad-like laugh, sounding like a chicken being strangled. The wretched-looking trio of master and servants looked at the youth in an unfriendly manner. Why is he not dead? Who knows? No idea which jerk was willing to give him food, the other servant answered angrily. Hey, you two, monitor him closely. Should he die, buy the house immediately, lest anyone else takes the opportunity, the plump businessman instructed. He twisted his heavy body and walked in the other direction. Noted, master, the servants replied as they carefully followed behind him. The 2 of them were almost able to hide in the shadow of the plump businessman. In the chilly night, the youth named Celine dragged his exhausted body out of Ceylon City. He carried the oil paper packet, left the main road, and limped back to his ancestral home. This enormous stone house was the last asset of the Metatron clan. Celine pushed the door open and entered the house shakily. The stone walls, covered with green moss, exuded a wintry feel. All the windows in this 2-story house had no glass in them, making the lonely stone house seem eerie and desolate. Celine gasped for air. He was finally home. He practically crawled up the stairs to his bedroom and lay his head against the bedboard. The bedboard was like the wall, wet, cold, and stiff. His clothing, which had been drenched by the rain, had been half-dried by the strong winds on his journey home. It was now stuck to his body. It was Celine's one and only piece of clothing. Celine struggled to push himself up, removed his clothes, and lay on the bedboard. The oil paper packet was placed next to his head. He felt a sharp pain at his waist and turned his head to take a look. It had been badly bruised. This had been from the kick from that servant. Celine grit his teeth as he lay down. The pain would disappear if he was asleep. The moonlight and cold breeze that trickled into the room were hardly poetic. Celine felt as though his body was burning, and there was a splitting pain in his head. It was possible that he would lose his life if the fever persisted. He struggled to climb out of his bed and pulled out a box from beneath the bed. The lock on the box had long since been dismantled. The silver lock had been traded for a week's worth of food. No one had been willing to buy the pest-proof camphor wooden box, and Celine had every intention of using it to start a fire one day. In the box was a messy pile of collection slips, most of them being debt-related documents. Celine fished out a metal badge and stuck it onto his forehead. The coolness seeped through his forehead and he felt as though his headache was waning. Celine sat on the floor and wept as he looked at the box full of collection slips. The Metatron clan had been a noble tribe, and the honorable name had been a sign of fortune in the northern part of the empire. By the time of Celine's generation, the Metatron clan had been left with nothing. The pile of collection slips had become useless pieces of paper. The debtors who had owed money back then had since passed away, and major shifts of power and wars had caused the gradual decline of the Metatron family. If the debtors had still been alive and had repaid him the amounts indicated on the collection slips, Celine would have been able to buy Ceylon City 10 times over. The badge, which was pressed upon Celine's forehead, was a symbol of the Metatron clan. Celine had not attempted to sell the palm-sized badge, as like the collection slips, it had been left to him by his father. Celine's parents had both died when he was 6 years old, leaving him the box and ancestral home. Celine had not been able to make a living for himself at the tender age of 6, and had needed to sell the things in the house in order to feed himself. Scheming businessmen had taken advantage of his situation to make money. What would a 6-year-old boy know? Within half a year, Celine had sold almost everything in the house. Although Celine was already 12 years old, he looked more like a 10-year-old since he was malnourished, skinny, and weak. Celine had not sold the ancestral home. It was not that he had not wanted to, but property transactions needed to be processed at City Hall and could not be falsified. The greedy businessmen who were eyeing his property preferred to wait until Celine starved to death. Upon his death, the property would not have an owner. Then, they would be able to buy the land for next to nothing. Celine's will to survive was very strong, and he had managed to last to the age of 12 through begging. Celine fell onto the bed. The family badge had sent coolness through his body, enough that the pain at his waist had lessened. Celine fell asleep, not knowing if he would wake up this time. Bang, bang, bang. Celine forced his eyes open and sat up. Sunlight streamed into the house through the window, the dirt on the floor evident. It was strange to have someone knocking on the door this early in the morning. Celine's ancestral home was not near any main roads, and was instead situated at the foot of a mountain across a spot of forest. Ever since he had sold everything in his home, no one had called upon him. Bang, bang, bang. The knocking at the door persisted. Celine jumped out of bed, feeling healthier and much lighter than before. He put the badge back into the box and shoved it under the bed before going downstairs to answer the door. Having been in a daze the night before, he had forgotten to lock the door. Fear suddenly gripped Celine. There were beasts in the area and he could have been devoured in his sleep if they had entered. The door opened with a shriek. Celine felt the warmth from the sun's rays as they streamed in. A middle-aged man was standing among the shadows of the trees. He had long black hair, wore a long gray robe, and held a wooden staff in his hand. This man could not have been more than 40 years of age. He had long, straight eyebrows that pointed upwards, and no beard. The hand holding the wooden staff was wearing a huge silver-black ring which was engraved with many complex symbols. Celine felt a little lost. The man had an odd appearance. Could he have been a high priest from the Roman Curia? His expression was very genial, but he had the air of a nobleman, as if that was simply how he was and it had nothing to do with anyone else. Life as a beggar had made Celine more sensitive. He knew the types of people he could approach versus the types he should avoid. But this man who had knocked on his door was different from the people of Ceylon City. He was standing right in front of Celine, and yet the youth could not feel his presence. The man smiled and asked Celine, "Where are the adults of the home?" This man must have come from a foreign land, because the people of Ceylon City knew of him as a jinx. Celine's inner voice quieted down as he rubbed his temples and answered, "There is no one else here." "Sir, may I know what is the matter?" Celine asked this politely, trying to appear at ease. To keep his life, he knew that he needed to get into the good books of the other party. This had been Celine's mantra in his 12 years of life experience. "Oh." The man looked at Celine, baffled. Celine had dashed down, topless and clad only in his shorts. He had a palm-sized mark on his forehead, left behind by the family badge. "This house is yours?" the man asked gently. "Yes." Celine looked down at the ground as his brown irises contracted. Could this man have been a bandit? "The thing is, I would like to buy this house. May I enter for a discussion?" Buy the house? Celine tried to reconcile with what he had just heard. He had long since planned to sell the house and then find a job in the city. He would not have minded work processing fish, as long as he could fill his stomach. However, he knew that apprentices were mostly given lodging instead of meals. If he had found work, he would have starved to death by the end of the first month. Celine turned to his side blankly and said, "Please come in." As the man stepped into the stone house, the dust beneath his feet disappeared, not leaving any imprints. There was a soft breeze, and the dampness in the living room instantly disappeared. Celine's heart fluttered with excitement, carefully calculating how much to sell the house for as he closed the door. The man glanced around the house, taking everything in. There was nothing in the house aside from its four walls, and there was nothing to admire. The man looked satisfied. He turned to Celine and asked, "You mentioned that this house is yours? Do you have the deed?" "I do." Celine nodded his head, but he did not return to the bedroom to retrieve the deed. As he had grown older, he realized that he had previously been cheated by those businessmen, and had learned to become more vigilant. The man smiled as he reached out his hand to stroke Celine's head, saying, "You need not worry. I am a mage and will not cheat you. Tell me, how many gold coins do you intend to sell this house for?" "Gold coins?" Celine's eyes lit up. He had never seen gold coins, even after he had begun to sell the things in the house. The person who had taken his 4-foot oil painting had only left him a silver coin. The gold-plated lampstand, which had been exchanged for 2 silver coins, was considered a fair transaction. When he was 6, the businessman who had moved away the full set of cupboards had left Celine only 2 loaves of bread. Chapter 4. The Apprentice Meets the Soldier, Unexplainable, Part 1. In the following 10 days, Celine repeated the spell continuously, but never once managed to complete it. Regardless of how perfect his incantation was or how skilled his hand gestures were, he just could not complete this simple level 0 magic. During this time, Mage Jason had appeared only once. The rest of the time, he was in the laboratory, which had been transformed from the former large living room. It appeared as though he did not need to eat anything, and was continuously conducting magical experiments in the house. Celine was a little anxious, but it was useless to be anxious when learning magic. Hence, he could only practice over and over again. Finally, on the 30th day, Celine mastered this magic. He dashed to Jason's laboratory excitedly. Jason saw the excitement on Celine's face and sighed as he said, "It took you 30 days to learn level 0 magic. This shows that your aptitude is extremely poor. I suggest that you do not continue, or you will probably remain an apprentice for the rest of your life." Celine was stunned. "Teacher. Not convinced? Let's do an experiment then." Jason took out a crystal ball, placed it on the table, and said, "Face this and complete the spell." As instructed, Celine hurriedly cast the reading magic spell, but there was no change in the clear crystal ball. Jason put the crystal ball away and said, "This is worse than I expected. You have great mental power, but your affinity to the elements is too weak. According to this assessment result, you will probably only be a grade 1 mage when you are 100 years old. Celine, if you are willing, I will give you a sum of money. You can find a swordcraft hall in a city of the Psychikinya Empire. You should do quite well learning swordcraft at your age." Celine felt as though he had been drenched by cold water. If it had not been for this opportunity, he probably would have accepted Jason's suggestion. However, having practiced for 30 days, he was now obsessed with magic. When he had completed the level 0 magic, the sense of euphoria that he had gotten from being in control could not be diminished from his core. Become a swordsman? Like the armed escorts of Ceylon City, who patrolled the streets every day and blocked the city gate to collect taxes? Or like the useless mercenary ones who, at 30 years old, could not even find themselves wives? Teacher, is there no other way? Celine asked as he struggled with his inner self. It is not that there is no other way, but I cannot afford to pay the price. This is not a problem that gold coins can resolve. You would need 9 mages willing to help you to reform your body's constitution. Even so, your future achievement would be that of a lowly mage at best, and it would not get you to grade 4, Jason replied helplessly. Teacher, I would like to give it a try. I would rather be a 100-year-old apprentice than a swordsman. Please teach me the method of meditation, Celine said, gritting his teeth. He had a bad impression of swordsmen. None of the swordsmen in Ceylon City were up to standard. In addition, there was no knowing what would happen after he took Jason's money to learn swordcraft. After having been deceived by many from a young age, Celine was disheartened with this world. If you insist, all right. But you are not allowed to leave after you have mastered my method of meditation until you have become a qualified mage. I am willing to persist. My method of meditation is very valuable, even in the Qin Empire. If you ever reveal it to others, I shall take your life. Do you understand? Jason said this calmly. Celine felt a chill at the bottom of his heart. He knew his teacher was not taking this lightly, and if he ever went against this request. So where do we start? Jason mumbled to himself. He was at a loss, as this was his first time ever having an apprentice. In the past, he had been a grade 2 apprentice with a strong foundation in knowledge when his teacher had taught him the method of meditation. Celine obviously did not know anything. The method of meditation is basically comprised of meditation skills, absorption of the elements, hypnosis, and spiritual resonance. The average mage only learns meditation skills. The full method of meditation can only be learned from a mage master. The books only offer simple meditation skills. Based on self-learning, one can never be a mage master. Jason patiently conducted lessons from scratch for Celine, and imparted every single piece of knowledge he possessed to him. Celine took merely half an hour to memorize everything that Jason had said. Jason was speechless at Celine's intelligence, but felt sad for him at the same time. He was such a bright child, but possessed such an unusually low affinity to the elements. All right, I have told you all about the method of meditation. You are very bright. Read the books upstairs according to the sequence. Meditating at least once a day will probably benefit you. Remember to prepare a meal for me once a week, and go to the city to get some bread if it runs out. I will give you a gold coin. After you have completely mastered the method of meditation, I will have jobs for you. Yes, teacher, Celine bowed his head and exited the room. He was still young and did not know that he had chosen an exceptionally tough route. He only felt elation, as though the door to another world had opened up for him. What he did not yet know was the price he had to pay for entering this door. Celine immediately went to the first room filled with books and began his learning. The first bookshelf covered language study. Celine was illiterate and could only take it one step at a time. Reading magic was mystical in that it enabled him to self-learn words. The only trouble was that after he had used reading magic once, he would need to rest for half an hour before he could use it again. Because of this, it took Celine a month before he finally learned the common language of the mainland, which was the language he had been speaking. He had wanted to move on to the next book in advance, but noticed that the types of magic books in the house were much too varied. In addition, not all of them were written in the common language. There were at least 20 languages in the books on those bookshelves. Celine had no choice but to finish the books on the first bookshelf before moving on to the next one. Mages were learned men. Without reading magic, it was impossible for one to fully practice magic. It was fortunate that Selene mastered the method of meditation within a month, at a much faster pace than before. He could now deploy reading magic twice and fully recover in 10 minutes. The magic elements found in apprentices of magic were usually pitifully low in number. Selene had even less than the average apprentice. Despite this, he was very content. Each of the 4 large rooms had dozens of big bookshelves amounting to tens of thousands of books in total. It was more than enough for him to read. He was no longer anxious about progression. Instead, he yearned to acquire more information. Selene patiently conducted his learning according to the sequence of the books. Language study comprised of more than 1,000 books: Common Language, Myers Language, Magical Language, Cheen Language, Psychikinya Language, Tangulasi Language. Selene even learned the Caucasus language. There had never been a mage in Caucasus. The area was very primitive and only had priests. Selene was now obsessed with learning languages. It took him half a year to master the content of more than 1,000 language books. It had been a slow start at the beginning, but as he started to recognize more words, the speed of his learning increased. By the time he completed the last book, he was able to deploy reading magic 3 times in succession. This signified that he had attained the grade of a Grade 2 apprentice. Selene was unaware that because his mental power was very strong, he had only exhausted a small amount of it while controlling his magic. As it had been used on level 0 magic, its usage had been pathetically low. In reality, the magical elements stored within his body were only comparable to that of a Grade 1 apprentice. Such speed was not only unique, but absolutely unheard of. An average person with such speed would have been kicked out long ago. Selene indeed possessed a most amazing law of meditation, and he had used only half a year's time to learn it. However, he did not even have any stored energy to work on his element magic. Jason was not positive that Selene was suitable for learning magic. The next topic was the knowledge of magic, which could similarly be found on a bookshelf of over 1,000 books. Since he had discovered the mysterious world of magic, Selene had no idea how much he would be able to learn, but he believed that his hard work would pay off. The year in which magic had originated was unknown. Many believed that the magic in the Myers mainland possessed over 30,000 years of history. It was not until about 10,000 years ago, during the Second Dynasty, that it had been properly categorized into 6 parts. These parts were namely earth, water, wind, fire, light, and darkness. From then on, the calendar in the Myers mainland had been improved. A year was divided into 12 months, each month had 30 days, 6 days formed a week. The 6th day of each week was considered the dark day, and was the day of rest for all trades. Even with the fall of Myers' goddess, the goddess of nature, and the rise of the Holy See, this practice had remained unchanged. The Holy See's calendar had been too complicated. It had thought that there should be 7 days in a week. After 100 years of implementation, out of the entirety of the mainland, only within the Holy See did anyone make use of the new calendar. In the end, they abandoned it as well. It was not that apprentices were limited to deploying level 0 magic before they became Grade 1 mages. After progressing to Grade 6, magic apprentices were generally allowed to learn level 1 magic and complete it. This was known as the method of acceleration within the magic formula. There was only one chance to use the method of acceleration, but it was not unusual for mages to succeed in it. However, after a mage accelerated, they would be weakened. It would be almost impossible for them to recover on their own. Only by relying on meditation could they recover their expended magic cords. Magic cords were the cornerstone of magic. Without them, an apprentice would not be able to progress to being a proper mage. The formation of the magic cords required strong mental power and a strong affinity to the elements. Selene's affinity to the elements was extremely low, thus Jason had said that he would have to wait until he was 100 years old to become a mage. Based on Celine's current speed of progress, this had been no exaggeration. Regarding what magic cords were, there were detailed descriptions in various books, but they were not universal. What Celine understood was that they were the base for the deployment of elemental power. The apprentices, through their continuous practice, would accumulate magic elements in their bodies. The volume of the magic elements would eventually change their qualities as well. This was the process in which magic cords were formed, similar to how an apprentice would progress to becoming a true blue mage. Celine was dismayed that he had not seen any book mentioning other ways to form magic cords. If he were to depend on accumulation, he had very little hope of ever becoming a mage. Within half a year, the food stored in the kitchen had all been eaten, and Celine knew that it was time for him to go into the city to stock up. He went to Jason's laboratory, and told him that he needed to go to the city. "How is your practice coming along?" "I am able to complete 3 reading skills in succession." Celine emphasized the word 3 in the hopes that it would attract his teacher's attention. "That's great. Go ahead." Jason did not say much but gave Celine 5 gold coins as he usually did. Celine's speed of progress was slightly faster than what he had predicted. However, Jason knew that it had only been due to Celine's strong mental power. He judged that since Celine still only had the capabilities of a grade 1 apprentice, it was meaningless for him to deploy any additional level 0 magic. It would not help Celine accumulate enough magical elements to form any magic cords. Chapter 5. The Apprentice Meets the Soldier, Unexplainable, Part 2. Celine took the gold coins and put on the robe that Jason had prepared for him. This robe had not been tailor-made. Although Celine had been eating well, he was still just a 12-year-old child and was not that tall. Even if the hem were to be cut off, it would still not fit Celine well. The 6 gold coins that he had with him were a large sum of money. In the past, he would not have spent this much even in an entire year. There had been no change to Ceylon City. The lazy soldiers guarding the city gate did not even bat an eyelid at Celine. Even though he had not visited in the last 6 months, the soldiers were still able to recognize him. Collecting an entry tax from a beggar? They would be a laughing stock if the other cities got wind of this. Celine walked along the road and stopped at a restaurant. Since it was still early in the day, he was not in a hurry to go to the grain store. Even when he had been penniless, he had always wanted to dine here. With the 6 gold coins on him, his dream could finally come true. It was not a small restaurant. To its right, there was a courtyard for horse carriages to be docked. Although Ceylon City was no longer in its prime, there were still a few nobles and businessmen left. Psychikinya was an empire of trade. Its 4 main trades could be found throughout the Myers mainland. Ceylon City, being a port city, had not diminished completely. Even though it was declining, it still had some life left in it. The restaurant enjoyed high patronage, as the wealthy in Ceylon City often chose it as a venue for entertainment. Celine was no longer illiterate. He looked up at the inscribed board above him. Written on the board above the main door was a line in the Myers language, "The Whale of Ceylon." When Ceylon City had been flourishing, the signature dish in this restaurant had been whale meat. Now that few fishermen were willing to fish for whales, the restaurant had hired a chef from Qin Empire to hold the fort. However, this board had not been replaced for hundreds of years. If one were willing to fork out a sufficient number of gold coins, there would be fishermen willing to risk their lives at sea. Celine could not afford whale meat, but it would not cost him more than 2 silver coins for 2 dishes on the first floor. He walked into the Whale of Ceylon, found himself an empty seat, and sat down. To his surprise, the server saw him, hurried to his table, and hollered at him loudly, "Beggar, get out of here quickly. There is nothing for you to eat." Celine fumed, his whole face turning red. He had previously been a beggar, but now he was an apprentice learning magic. Even an apprentice had dignity. He fished out a gold coin from his pocket and slammed it hard on the table. He looked at the server from the side of his eye and asked, "Who were you calling a beggar?" The server was astounded, and quickly put a smile on his face. He bowed as he nodded his head and said, "Oh, young master, I must have mistaken you for someone else. There was a young boy that did not pay for his food yesterday. That certainly was not you. Please pardon me, I shall bring you the menu now." He turned and walked off, fearful of hearing Celine's reply. Celine did not feel appeased, but since the server had apologized, it would be uncivilized of him to continue to rant. Celine did not notice that a few patrons had come down from the second floor. Leading the way was that one plump businessman, and next to him was the servant who had previously nearly killed him with his kick. The businessman was surprised at the sight of Celine, especially the gleaming gold coin on his table. At one glance, he could tell that it was a genuine Psychikinya Empire oak gold coin. The businessman maintained his composure and left the Whale of Ceylon. After he had stepped out of the door, he said to the servant next to him, "That lad looked like he was that Jinx from the Metatron clan. How is he still alive?" "Master, I am puzzled as well. If no one helped him, he should have starved to death by now. I thought I saw a gold coin with him just now," replied the servant, his brows furrowed. "Strange. He is a beggar, where did he get the gold coin?" "Master, I heard that there has been a gang of bandits in the city recently, and they have adopted some children. Do you think that? So what if he was? Worm, go to the city guard department and call for a few soldiers. Inform them that we have lost money, and get this lad arrested and killed off. Take this gold coin with you, and do as I told you," the businessman told him carefully. Then, with a few other servants, he returned to the Whale of Ceylon. Celine had no idea of the catastrophe that was ahead of him. He ordered 2 inexpensive dishes costing less than 2 silver coins altogether. As he was still underage, he did not dare consume alcohol. Hence, he ordered a pot of tea, and enjoyed it immensely. Then, he realized that his attire was not all that suitable for the Whale of Ceylon, as he saw that the other diners were well dressed. Some were even dressed in clothes tailor-made with silk from the Qin Empire. His robe looked like it had been picked up somewhere. It was no wonder that the server had wanted to chase him out. He decided that he would buy himself proper attire once he had the money to do so that he would not be so looked down upon. The first dish that Celine had ordered was served. Before he even managed to pick up his cutlery, 4 soldiers dashed in through the door and held him down at once. Without a word, they chained him up. "What are you all doing?" Unable to fight back, Celine was both terrified and livid. "What? Lad, you have committed a crime and still have the nerve to dine here. Bring him back." The soldiers who seized him were behaving savagely like wild tigers and wolves. They were from the city guard department, and were responsible for maintaining the security of Ceylon City. As there was rarely additional revenue to be made and someone had lodged a report today, they had kept the gold coin, regardless of the truth. They had not had such an unusual transaction for the last 2 years. Bullsh *T. Celine's face was pinned to the hard table top, and he began to lose his composure. He had done nothing, and struggled to resist. A city guard soldier lifted his leg and gave Celine a kick in his ribs. Ouch! Celine made a sound that did not sound human. This kick had been so harsh that his bones had cracked. That kick brought back memories of his days as a beggar. Back then, he had felt nothing when he was hurt by such random kicking. But now, Celine felt humiliated. He turned his face to the side, and spat hard at the other soldier's face. The soldiers retaliated with a series of punches and kicks. The vicious soldiers resorted to using an iron chain to bridle Celine's mouth. The 4 soldiers then dragged Celine out. The businessmen sneakily followed behind them. The server pursued them, shouting, "Master, that person has not paid." The soldier laughed. His money is stolen. Do you want stolen money? I would not dare, the server replied submissively, feeling unlucky. He should not have attended to this lad, looking at his improper attire. The cost of his meal would be deducted from his salary. Damn! He had done half a month of work for nothing. He hurriedly turned around and brought the dish on the table back to the kitchen. He was hoping that the second order had not been prepared yet, which would save him from needing to pay for it. Celine was brought to the city guard department. Without interrogation, he was thrown straight into the dungeon. Celine had recovered some of his energy. Using all his might to knock on the metal bars, he shouted, "Why did you arrest me?" The 4 soldiers turned around and grinned. "If you hadn't mentioned it, I had nearly forgotten that we have not searched for the stolen money on your body." "The money is mine." Celine's 6 gold coins were removed from his body. It was futile to resist. "Now it is ours." The soldier locked up the metal gate, ignoring Celine's cries. They did not even hear the critical information that Celine shouted in a hoarse voice, "My teacher is a mage." In fact, even if they had heard it, the few soldiers would not have believed it. What kind of mage would take this beggar as an apprentice? Not even the Lord had the opportunity to invite a mage home. Celine was beginning to feel frightened and even a little despondent. He had absolutely no idea what was happening. Jason usually did not venture out of his room, perhaps only once every 2 weeks or so, and did not even eat the weekly meals Celine prepared for him. It was pitch black in the dungeon, and in Celine's fears escalated in his heart. He opened his mouth but did not know what to shout anymore. There was pain in his face, especially in his jaw. The bone there might have been broken. His lips were swollen. Although Celine could feel tears welling in his eyes, he resisted them. "I am an apprentice of magic now. No more crying, not now, not ever." As night fell, Ceylon's city quieted down, and the city gate was locked. Under the moonlight, a shadow quickly approached the city gate, with speed as fast as lightning. This man came to the outside of the gate with his eyebrows furrowed. With a lift of his arms, a pair of wing-like attachments opened up on his back. He flew into the air, over the city wall, and headed into the city. The guard on patrol discovered the shadow and yelled, "Who is there?" The man did not pay him any attention. His silhouette had appeared against in the moonlight and then disappeared at the end of the street. Soon after, the man arrived at the city guard department. Under the moonlight, his gray magic robe gave him an air of mystery, as smoke enveloped him. This person was Jason Statham, who had made a magic mark on Celine's body. As Celine did not return, Jason knew that something must have happened. He followed the directions from the magic mark and came to Ceylon City. The magic mark could direct the mage. Even though Celine had been locked underground, it was not a problem for Jason. "Who?" The soldier on duty had barely shouted out his question before Jason had grabbed his throat and raised him up in the air. A grade 5 mage's body was powerful and could not be defeated by any ordinary soldier. "Where is that boy you captured today?" "Bring me to him," Jason said coldly, with none of the gentle demeanor he usually used on Celine. "What boy?" Jason drew the soldier's face closer and stared straight into his eyes. "Bring me to where you lock up the convicts, and call everyone out here." The soldier was so terrified that he felt as though his spirit had left his body. He had seen a demon in the eyes of this middle-aged man who was grabbing him, and it was drawing its tongue out from its eyes to wrap it around his neck to constrict his breathing. His legs softened, and whitish foam appeared at his mouth as he dropped onto the ground. Jason scowled. He had probably overused his shock tactic. The soldier was, at most, a junior swordsman and could not withstand this. Jason decided to follow the directions by the magic mark to locate the dungeon. With the use of illumination magic, the dungeon was aglow. Upon seeing that Jason had appeared, he grabbed the metal bars with both his hand, speechless. He had lost his voice entirely. Given the commotion caused by Jason, all the soldiers on duty had already blocked the exit to the dungeon. One of the soldiers hollered, "Bold outlaw! How dare you break into jail? Put down your weapon this instant." As he was about to continue speaking, another sharp-eyed soldier pointed at the brightly lit dungeon and stammered, "It looks like magic? You must be joking. Really, look." Jason ignored them and tugged at the lock with one hand. All it took was a gentle yank, and the lock opened. Celine pushed the metal gate open and dashed out, almost crashing into Jason's embrace. His lips moved slightly, but even he could not also tell what the sound that was coming out from his own throat was. "Who was the one who had captured my apprentice?" Jason asked expressionlessly. The soldiers looked at each other. No one had dared to answer. One of them cursed in his heart, "Which death-seeking shoal got us into trouble? To think he captured a mage's apprentice." If no one knows, Jason did not say much. He stretched his hand out, and a fireball appeared, suspended in his palm. Fireball skill was only a grade 1 magic, but to have evoked and suspend it from release would be something just a grade 4 mage can do. However, these ordinary soldiers could barely afford to offend any mage, no matter the grade. Sir, please do not be angered. I will help you with the search," a savvy soldier said, as he turned and ran towards the exit. Looking solemn as he pulled Celine along, he walked out from the dungeon to the main hall of the city guard department and took a seat in there. Chapter 6. The Mage's Principle, Part 1. The guards did not dare leave, and stood nervously to one side. There were not many of them in the city guard department of Ceylon City. The real army troops were under the control of the House of the Lord, forming his private army troop. Given the episode that had occurred at the city guard department, many people had already gone to inform the troops at the House of the Lord. Before long, out on the streets were the thunderous sounds of horses' hooves galloping and charging towards the soldiers. More than 100 swordsmen surrounded the soldiers. 10 of them jumped off of their horses and walked through the door of the city guard department. Earlier on, Jason had blown up the door with a fireball. The leader of the group, who was wearing the armor of a swordsman, drew his sword and walked into the main hall. The swordsmen behind him all drew their weapons. The armored swordsman saw the situation in the hall and pointed at Jason angrily, "Who are you, and how dare you break into jail to rescue a prisoner? Let's fight." "Scoundrel," Jason berated, as he raised his finger. A green glow appeared and a jet of acid shot out towards the swordsman's face. A sizzling sound could be heard and white smoke emerged. The acid had instantly corroded this swordsman's face. He screeched in pain and collapsed to the ground. After Jason had done this deed, he told Celine softly, "Even if we are enemies, he should not have insulted us mages. Even the emperor must not have a mage bow his head. There was no need to give such an ill-mannered man any courtesy." "Understood, teacher," Celine answered in a low voice. Everyone in the hall who had heard what was said shivered more than once. "Drag him out. He is very noisy," Jason told the soldier opposite him. Having received amnesty, a soldier who had barged and hurriedly dragged his injured compatriot out. "I do not have time for this. Who was responsible for arresting my student? Bring him to me within half an hour." Jason took out a magical hourglass, turned it over, and placed it on the table. At this point, another 2 armored swordsmen walked in. Their suits of armor showed their positions of higher rank, and they were possibly officers. The 2 of them looked similar in stature and were well built. One had red hair while the other was blonde. The blonde swordsman raised his head to look at Jason, who was still maintaining an illumination, and felt a chill in his heart. He was not an ignorant soldier. Jason's gray mage robe had 2 lines of mage symbols, indicating that he was a grade 5 mage. Which fool had infuriated such an important person? Mage robes had 3 colors, white for grade 1 to grade 3, gray for grade 4 to grade 6, and black for grade 7 to grade 9. The symbols on the robes represented the mage's grade. The gray-robed master was considered a mage master, and such a figure was someone that even the Lord could not afford to offend. The red-haired swordsman bowed silently to Jason, and told the soldiers around him, "All of you, arrest the men who were connected to this matter at once. If any of them are left out, you will take their place." These soldiers glanced at Jason, who was expressionless but did not seem to object, then left in an unruly manner. The red-haired swordsman spoke carefully to Jason, "Mage sir, is there anything else you need me to do?" Jason hesitated and said, "Do not let the Lord come by. I do not wish to see him." The red-haired swordsman was momentarily surprised. He bowed his head and said, "Yes. Mage sir, this young master is hurt. May I get a holy master to come?" "Not necessary. He can bear this little pain." Jason rejected the red-haired swordsman's kind offer. He was not anxious to treat Celine since it was not a serious wound. It could stay, so that Celine could be reminded of what had happened today. Had Celine done something to get himself arrested? No matter if he had been right or wrong, the lesson could prevent similar situations from reoccurring in the future. The red-haired swordsman spoke briefly to the blonde swordsman, and the latter walked out of the hall with his head lowered. The red-haired swordsman stood at one side waiting. Celine had thought he was doomed and had not expected his teacher to come. Things were looking up for him. It appeared that his teacher was not interested in responding even to the Lord. Only now did Celine truly understand what it meant to be a mage. The books had often depicted how mages were held in high esteem, but it had been difficult to imagine as Celine had not witnessed it himself. He recognized the red-haired swordsman as someone from the house of the Lord. He was not a bad person, as last mid-autumn, he had given Celine a small extra bag of flour when he had gone to collect the flour that the Lord was distributing. It took less than half an hour to capture the 4 soldiers who had arrested Celine, as well as the businessman and his servants. The 6 of them did not know what had happened. The businessman saw Celine standing next to Jason and knew that something was amiss. He was the first to kneel on the ground, and his servants followed suit. "Who arrested my student?" Jason asked coldly. The 4 soldiers looked at each other, and then looked at the red-haired swordsman standing to the side. The red-haired swordsman did not appear to see them, his eyes looking upwards. The 4 soldiers had no choice but to put on a bold front and answered, "It was us. We received a reported case about him, stealing Master Janbu's gold coins." The soldiers pointed at the businessmen, feigning innocence. "Janbu? That is you, I assume. Why did you malign my student?" Jason glared at the businessman, questioning him strictly. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. I had the wrong person." "You are lying." "I will give you another chance," Jason interrupted him. "Sir, it is the truth. I did not have any enmity with him. Why would I frame him? The businessman was going on and on. Jason impatiently cast a spell. A white glow flashed and an ice pick pierced through the businessman's head, leaving a gaping bloody hole. "Do not be so idiotic, mages can detect lies. You, tell me. Why was my student framed?" Jason asked the servant after killing the businessman. He was not pursuing the matter to prosecute someone, but wanted to know if Celine had invited trouble. The servant had already wet his pants in fear. He flung himself onto the ground and wailed, "Sir, it was not my idea. My master had wanted to buy Master Metatron's house but wanted to avoid the procedures at the city government office. Master Metatron had all along managed to escape death, so my master thought of this idea. It was really not my doing." "I know it has nothing to do with you," Jason said and flung a wind blade at him. The light green wind blade instantly sliced off the servant's head. Blood spluttered and the head, along with the mucus and tears, rolled over to one side. After Jason had done this, he told Celine, who was next to him, "Celine, it was indeed not your fault. Come back with me. The four of you, I am not pleased with your propensities for arresting people. I had better chop off your hands, in case you arrest the wrong people in future and end up losing your lives. Sir, your student was unharmed. How about," the red-haired swordsman began to plead on their behalf. Jason stood up and pulled Celine out of the hall without glancing at the red-haired swordsman. His voice rang out in the hall, "I have spared them because my student was unharmed. If he had died, all of you would have joined him in burial. Tomorrow, sort out that Janbu's assets and send them to the outskirts as an apology to my student. I will kill one person for every gold coin omitted." The red-haired swordsman shivered coldly. There was not a single mage in Ceylon City, and if this grade 5 mage were to wreak havoc, it was possible that a massacre could occur. With Celine in tow, Jason walked out of Ceylon City. The soldiers at the gate, who had already received word of what had happened earlier, opened the city gates hurriedly, hoping for the departure of the troublemakers. Back at the ancestral home, Jason used rain magic to treat Celine's injuries. While treating Celine, Jason questioned him on the details of the happenings of the day. Celine carefully related the details so that Jason could understand what had happened. He did not blame Celine. Being a child, he would not know the deviousness that some people could have. This lesson would be sufficient to help Celine understand that in this world, strength was the absolute principle. After being treated, Celine returned to his room to rest, recollecting what had happened that day. If it had not been for his teacher, his gold coins could have caused him to lose his life instead. He must become stronger. He must. His eyes remained open as he lay on the bed, unable to fall asleep. It was dark in the room, reminding him of his time in the dungeon. The heart palpitations and feelings of desperation had yet to diminish, and the fear of death had eroded his young soul. Celine felt his way out of his bed and lit the candle on the table. Only then was he able to close his eyes and slip into slumber. The next morning, the red-haired swordsman came running with the gold coins. It appeared as though he had had a busy night tabulating the assets of the deceased. Jason did not say anything to him and had Celine attend to him. The red-haired swordsman sat uneasily in the front hall as Celine came running down from upstairs. The red-haired swordsman hurriedly stood up and greeted Celine, "Master Metatron, you are up." Celine was unused to the other party's warm greeting. Previously, when he had walked along the streets, the Lord Swordsman treated him as though he were invisible. The red-haired swordsman might have been a kind person at heart, but if it had not been for his teacher's request, the only kind thing he would have done for Celine was give him an extra bag of flour during the festive season. It was likely, but had he forgotten about this incident? "Master Metatron," the red-haired swordsman called out to Celine, who was lost in his own thoughts. What is it?" The red-haired swordsman answered somewhat embarrassedly, "Janbu's assets have been tabulated. There are about 2,200 gold coins, as well as 2 properties and some livestock worth about 400 gold coins. It is a bad time to sell the properties, so they will have to be kept pending. After they have been sold, I will send the gold coins over. Here are bank notes worth 2,000 gold coins, and here are 200 gold coins." The red-haired swordsman put 4 bags of money on the table, each one of them packed to the brim. Celine's eyes could not stop twitching. In spite of the previous day's suffering, he did not pounce forward to count the gold coins. Instead, he said solemnly, "Those 2 properties are yours if you are able to raise 300 gold coins. If it is convenient, send the money over this afternoon, and also bring me half a year's supply of rice, flour, seasonings, and dried meat. Is that possible?" "No problem." The red-haired swordsman was delighted. It would have been a challenge to sell both properties for 400 gold coins. He had been fearful about Jason's warning, "I will kill one person for every omitted gold coin." Now that Celine was willing to sell them to him at a discount, he could gain tens of gold coins and not worry about any shortfalls. After sending off the red-haired swordsman, Celine brought the 4 money bags and 2 Qin Empire bank notes to Jason's magic laboratory. Keep them with you. If your magic skills improve, you will need a lot of money. Get more from me when you have used it up. Jason did not take Celine's money. He could not have cared less about this meager amount of gold coins. He had simply been a little bothered by the night before, when an unimportant businessman had insulted his dignity and lied to him. This was why he had taken the chance to seize Jeanbu's assets, as compensation for himself and Celine. Chapter 7. The Mage's Principle, Part 2. Thank you, teacher, said Celine with a heart full of joy. He picked up the bags of money and returned to his room, putting the bags of money and the Qin Empire bank notes into the box which still contained the outdated collection slips, documents, and his family badge. Celine tried to stuff the money into the box but felt that it was not right, so he took it out again, unsure of where to place it. After wavering for a short while, Celine felt that he was being a little ridiculous. What thief would dare sneak into the house with Jason around? Recalling how his teacher had released one spell after another at the city guard department without chanting, Celine felt his excitement mounting. If he was able to do the same, no one would dare harass him. Magic was the only principle in this world. Those who possessed abilities in magic were above the law. At the thought of this, Celine could not sit still. He put the money on top of his bed and headed to a room containing magic books. Looking at the rows of bookshelves in the room, Celine was impatient and wanted to read each and every book there. He walked to the back and stood before the shelf containing the Level 0 magic books. The shelf for Level 0 magic was the largest, and yet it did not have the largest number of spells. There were less spells than there were in Level 1 magic. Despite this, there were 4 books to a series titled Principles of Level 0 Magic, and each was extremely thick. Celine took a book and sat himself down on the ground. Leaning against the shelf, he began reading. Reading magic, illumination magic, burning magic, detection magic, poison detection, invisible shield. Reading on, Celine was a little overwhelmed. He realized that without the support of a theoretical system, he did not even know how to decide on what to learn. As he leaned on the bookshelves in a daze, Celine felt like he had lost control. Even if a person was eager to increase their strength, they could not be overly ambitious. His teacher had asked that he conduct his learning in order. If he skipped over his foundation, it might cause unknown issues in future. At this thought, Celine placed Principles of Level 0 Magic back onto the bookshelf, returned to the beginning, and started to gather basic knowledge on magic in a systematic manner. Magic was categorized into 6 types, but in practical terms, when learning magic, most people conducted their learning according to its uses. The 6 types included the Attack series, Protection series, Therapy series, Alchemy series, Potion series, and one other type. In addition to the 6 types, there was also the Summon series, which was not a popular form of magic. It had originated in recent times, beginning no more than 10,000 years ago, but it had declined some 5,000 years ago. The deployment of each magic spell had 3 stages: the preparatory stage, the completion stage, and the release stage. The preparatory stage referred to the chanting of spells, use of gestures, pooling of elements, and resonance of magic, all of which required the mage's use of their mental power to control. With practice, the mage could shorten the time needed to prepare their magic by chanting silently and omitting the hand gestures. The completion stage referred to the spell being formed and readied for deployment. This stage could be extended. The mage could keep the prepared spell on standby while preparing a second spell to achieve an intensive attack. For example, after a mage had prepared a fireball spell, they could choose not to deploy it while preparing a second fireball spell. When the second fireball spell was ready, they could deploy both at the same time. This skill was known as double release, and was a method commonly used by mages to magnify their attacks. Similarly, double release required the mage to have powerful mental power. Without strong control, the mage could cause severe harm to themselves if the elements emerged in a disorderly manner. The release stage was about more than just the deployment of a prepared spell. This stage comprised of locking onto the target, the final cutting of the elements, and time control. These three parts all relied on mental power to be completed, with locking onto the target being the most basic ability. Without tracking abilities, a mage was no different from an archer. The final cutting of the elements was the key to expending the spell. Without this ability, the mage's expenditure would always be at the maximum. Lacking good control, a grade 1 mage could use up their magic cords by simply releasing 2 level 1 spells instead of the usual 12. Time control referred to the continuous control that was exerted while magic was being released, allowing the magic to complete its release at the most appropriate time. This skill was also known as level 2 execution. Senior mages could skillfully use level 2 execution to control the momentum of the battle. Similarly, level 2 execution was also used in the making of magic scrolls and alchemy. Mastery of these abilities was the absolute minimum for one to be a qualified mage. Selene also understood that the values of the basic attributes of each spell were not fixed. Execution time, execution distance, and energy units were 3 variable components. The execution time of a spell was not measured in seconds, but in frames. Each frame was equivalent to 1/60th of a second. Instant execution was not done at a speed of 0 frames, but at a speed of 2 frames. While it was commonly said that magic was instantaneous, this essentially meant that it took 2 frames for the 3 stages to be completed: preparatory, completion and release, which was 2/60ths of a second. No matter how powerful a mage was, they could not compress this time further. The cause of the 0-frame illusion had been the double release, meaning that a mage would not release a spell after it had been completed, but would store it for release at the same time as the second spell. Basically, the post-completion release stage of this spell took place concurrently with the release of the second spell. This required the mage to have resilient mental power. Such a skill was considered high-order control, which was a very dangerous action. Selene read on, and realized that he had indeed been ignorant to have thought that magic was merely a powerful means of attack. He had never imagined that the basic knowledge of magic would be so complicated. If he did not put in the effort to learn it well, his future progress would be unusually problematic. Without this basic knowledge, not only would the abilities of a mage be confined, but they would also be unable to judge the abilities of others. One would not be able to determine whether the numerical value for the execution time should be at its minimum or maximum, the numerical conversion between the execution distance and the power of the attack, the relationship between units of energy and the cutting of elements, and so on. Senior mages could make the calculations instantly to determine the effects of their releases of magic instead of leaving things to fate. Control. The power of magic depended on control. Selene patiently read on and began to acquire mathematical knowledge such as how to calculate these magic formulae. This mathematical knowledge was critical to the creation of a magic array. In a flash, another 3 months had passed. Selene, aside from taking his meals and relieving himself, had essentially not stepped out of the room. As he carried on, he began to feel depressed. His intellect and mental strength were perfect, but his affinity to the elements was lacking. If his affinity to the elements had just been of normal standard, it would have been sufficient for him to have been an outstanding mage. It was evident that where affinity to the elements was concerned, he was useless. This made it very difficult for him to form magic cords. Without magic cords, all of these were simply castles in the air. A year passed, and Selene was only at the standard of a grade 1 apprentice with the abilities of a grade 2 apprentice. He had learned 5 types of level 0 magic, namely reading magic, poison detection, acid sputtering, flame combustion, and blending of elements. He had mastered the method of meditation, and through meditation, he could quickly restore the loss of magical elements. The reason for this outcome was because the amount of magical elements that had been deposited into Celine's body were too small. Even while relying on self-healing and not doing anything, he needed 10 minutes to recover. What was the use of having 3 types of level 0 magic? Nothing could be achieved with them. Rather than have him use magic during battle, it would be more beneficial to give Celine a knife instead. At the very least, after a year of being nursed back to health, Celine's body was much healthier. Although he still looked thin and weak, his strength had, in fact, increased. Since the food previously delivered by the red-headed swordsman had been finished off, Celine needed to go into the city again. Now, he no longer harbored the ridiculous thoughts he had half-year ago of exquisite clothes, trendy hairstyles, and nice horse carriages. Such things were all so stupid and ridiculous when mages were concerned. Knowledge was the only thing that mages relied on. Wearing the comical robe and black boots that Jason had bought for him, Celine bid farewell to Jason before leaving the ancestral house. Jason had given him 2 bags of gold coins totaling 100 pieces as well as a list of items to buy. Mage's experiments required large quantities of low-grade materials, and Jason's laboratory was perpetually in operation. His basic materials had almost been exhausted within a year. Ceylon City was a port city where items from overseas could be ordered, and it took only a week to receive the goods. This was why Jason had chosen to remain here in a relatively remote place where one could still buy necessities. Entering Ceylon City again, this dilapidated city looked completely different in Celine's eyes. Having spotted Celine on the road from afar, the soldiers guarding the city hastily straightened up. The soldiers at the city gate were affiliated with the House of the Lord, and were not linked to the city guard department. The 2 soldiers' expressions were a mix of wariness, envy, jealousy, and fear. They immediately put on fawning smiles. "Master Metatron, good morning." Celine nodded, not knowing how to reply. To be honest, soldiers from the House of the Lord were much better than those from the city guard department. In the past, when he had visited the city, they had not made things difficult for him. He had been like a mass of air with no scent. As long as he did not request otherwise, no one had noticed him. "Master Metatron?" Half a year ago, Celine probably would have been pleased. After the incident with the city guard department, Celine had become more mature and understood that these people feared his teacher, a grade 5 mage who would make their heads explode. Celine followed the sunshine and walked along the road leading to the pier. There was a long street in front of the pier lined with all kinds of shops. Ceylon City's only equipment store was situated here. As Celine entered the store, he nearly collided with a youth. The youth opposite to Celine was about the same age as him. He seemed to have been frightened and nearly fell, but caught himself in time. Although Celine was just an apprentice of magic, his mental power was comparable to that of a real mage. With keen perception, he realized that the youth's hand was touching his money bag. It was a well-concealed hand. Celine was amused. It must have been an unlucky year for him to have bumped into a thief the moment he was out. He gently nudged the hand, and a flash of fire pressed onto the juvenile's hand. The youth felt a sharp pain on the back of his hand, as though he had been scalded by a hot rod. He was stunned and gave a sudden shout, "Is that you, Celine?" Chapter 8. Magic Pharmaceutics, Part 1. The youth called out Celine's name as he withdrew his hand. Celine had possessed no intention of hurting him, otherwise, the level 0 flame combustion spell used in such close proximity would have burned his skin and flesh. "Decca?" Celine recognized the youth in front of him and felt conflicted. Decca, also an orphan, was someone that Celine had known when he was a beggar. Back then, they had been down and out, being equally skinny and filthy. By their chance meeting here today, Celine's demeanor had completely changed, and the same was true for Decca, who looked nothing like the street urchin from those days. Decca smiled in embarrassment, as he had known about Celine but had not recognized him earlier. He knew that Celine had become the apprentice of a mage. He was unsure if he would still be acknowledged as the friend he had made when they were both poor. "Wait for me at the entrance," Celine said as he gave Decca a pat on his shoulder. Celine appeared to have grown much taller than Decca in this 1 year. Feeling his warmth, Decca turned to his side and exited from the door. He then waited in the shadows across the street. There was no professional union in Ceylon City, thus the equipment store appeared to be deserted. The adventurers were all gathered at Xinjiang in the southern part of the empire, though there were fewer pirates at the northern coast. Celine approached the counter and shouted for the owner. The counter was about 1 meter high. The owner was drowsy and had been dozing off on the counter. He heard the shout, but did not see anyone when he opened his eyes. He then stood up and saw Celine, who was much shorter than the counter. "Hey, Master Metatron." The owner saw Celine and instantly perked up. Celine waved his hand, indicating for him not to be so noisy. He passed him the list that Jason had given him and asked, "How much deposit do I need to pay to order these?" The owner gave a quick glance at the list and grinned. This was not a small deal and was worth at least 100 gold coins. It probably would not have meant much in the bigger cities, but it was definitely a rare business deal in Ceylon City. "Master Metatron, please wait a moment." The owner retrieved his abacus and started to calculate with some cracking sounds. Celine saw the owner calculating the price of the items and decided to walk around the inside of the store. The size of the equipment store was not small, but there were no shelves in the center. All of the goods were displayed in the cabinets against the walls. The most striking items were 2 suits of armor near the entrance. These were 2 fully enclosed suits of knight armor which even had polished crystals set into the segments for the eyes. This type of armor was rarely worn nowadays because the knight rank class had died out during the 4th dynasty. Now, only the Holy See still maintained a pool of 10,000 knights. The other 4 empires had done away with their bodies of knights. The 2 suits of armor had been made in an ancient style, and the sheets of metal looked as if they had been repolished. They looked to be antiques. The value of these cultural relics exceeded the value of their use. Admiring the armor, Celine placed his hand onto them. His mental strength could not penetrate them. They seemed to be truly authentic. It was virtually impossible for his level 0 magic to be able to break through the armor. This metal armor was better than ordinary leather armor, though Celine was well aware that it was still not as good as magic armor. He knew that his level of battle power was still lacking against swordsmen in armor. If he needed to deal with 2 soldiers, he would practically stand no chance. Magic sometimes made him depressed, and other times it made him excited. With the momentary contact, he had been able to calculate the defensive capabilities of the armor and knew which levels of magic could be used to destroy it. Unfortunately, he did not have any hope of becoming a qualified mage anytime in the foreseeable future. "Master Metatron." The owner replied with a smile, having completed the calculations. "The total is 180 gold coins. See if you can pay a deposit of 100 gold coins. As I am only running a small business here, I do not have a good cash flow." "Yes." Celine turned, threw 2 bags of gold coins onto the counter, and asked, "When can we get the items?" "The same time next week will be fine." "Will you need them delivered?" "Not necessary. Teacher does not like to be disturbed by others. Please wait while I issue you an invoice." The owner put away the gold coins. Celine asked casually, "Are we able to order anything and everything here?" "Master Metatron, I import my goods from Yaoyang City. Whatever Yaoyang City has can be ordered from here. If you need special items, you will have to order them from Holy Rock City. It will be slower, and I am afraid you will need to wait a month for these items." "Alright, noted." Celine took the invoice that the owner had issued him, turned, and left the equipment store. "Decca," Celine called out to the other side of the street, waving as he stepped out through the door. Decca appeared from the shadows and faced Celine, not knowing what to say. "Let's find a place to eat." Celine was feeling hungry. He would not go to the Whale of Ceylon this time. As the pair walked north along the pier, they found a small shop. It was still morning and there were not many diners. They sat next to the window, and Celine ordered 2 bowls of fish noodles. Using their forks to twirl the noodles, the pair ate in silence. When they had nearly finished their meal, Celine put down his fork and asked, "Decca, why did you?" "You mean why did I steal?" Decca also put down his fork, pondered for a moment, and replied in a low voice, "There was a bandit gang that came to the city around this time last year. They took in a batch of children and I was one of them. No one forced me to join. As you know, children like us could starve to death on the streets at any time." "Bandit gang?" Celine frowned. The reputation of bandit gangs were not good. Once caught, the majority of nobles would kill the bandits without even interrogating them. Decca saw Celine's worried look and consoled him, "It is nothing. This bandit gang does not do red cases." Seeing that Celine did not understand, Decca explained, "We merely take things, we do not kill. Generally, we do not rob, and we mainly cheat. If the matter is brought to light, then we walk away. It is rare that anyone pursues us." "It is not suitable for the long term," Celine could not help saying. Because they were bandits, very few of them would die natural deaths. For senior bandits who made money, it was hard for them to withdraw during their prime. "I have no choice, it is too late for me to withdraw now," Decca said in a low voice as his gaze swept across the door. "How do I find you in the future?" "It is easy to find me. How about we go back to the hideaway and meet with my gang leader?" Celine's face turned stony. His 2 distinct eyebrows raised almost at the same time. He looked intently at Decca and said, "This was your gang leader's idea? You need not say anything more. Go back and tell him not to make me his target if he still wants to live." Decca felt a shiver run through his body. Celine's glare was as sharp as a sword, making him subconsciously want to reach for the dagger in his boots. But as his wrist shifted slightly, he felt a pain in his hand. The scald on his hand had reminded him of Celine's identity. "Celine, I cannot help it. Actually, during winter, the gang leader will have me look for you. I have no interest in the bandit gang. If my teacher learns about this matter, I may not be able to protect you. Decca, you had better take good care of yourself." Celine finished what he wanted to say, retrieved a gold coin and placed it on the table, and left without turning back. Decca sat there stunned and out of sorts. Celine was no longer the innocent child he had been before. He had simply made a vague suggestion, and was immediately seen through. Could this be the power of magic? Celine walked out the door, feeling the breeze blow past him. The pent-up emotions in his heart were finally released. To think that a bandit actually wished to connect with a mage. His teacher had not even wanted to be bothered with the Lord. This person did not know what was good for him. The best solution was to kill him and prevent him from being a burden to Decca. He was the only friend he had left in Ceylon City. Celine had not realized that he had become more decisive after the incident half a year ago. He had also become more alert to danger. Jason had not done any additional coaching with him, he had merely read books, cooked for Jason, and eaten with him. Gradually and subtly, Celine's demeanor had completely changed. He found the grain shop, placed the order, and made the payments. Celine had purchased enough food to last them half a year. He then left Ceylon City dispirited. More than once, he had fantasized about living wealthily in the city, wearing the best clothes and indulging in wine and music. Now that he finally had money, he realized that his thoughts had been naive. As dark clouds gathered across the horizon, Celine quickened his pace, knowing that the summer rain in Ceylon City was unpredictable. Upon returning to the ancestral house, Celine went to see Jason and told him about the collection date of the goods. Jason suddenly asked, "Celine, how long have I been here?" "A year and 6 days. All right. Bring this along when you collect the goods next week." Jason gave Celine a huge leather sack. Then he added, "Starting next week, on the first day of every week, you will join me as I conduct experiments." "Teacher. From today on, you are officially my student." Celine was thrilled. Jason had never allowed him to watch his experiments before. He had never thought that he would receive his teacher's personal guidance, nor had he ever thought that this day would come so quickly. He was not aware that Jason had followed him from a distance during his trip to the city. In fact, Jason had even heard his conversation with Decca. Celine had passed this test. If there had been something amiss in his conversation with Decca, Jason would have needed to give him up as an apprentice. To groom a student required energy as well as emotion. As for Celine's lack of affinity with the elements, he would have to think of a solution in the time to come. Jason smiled and looked at his student. He took out a bottle and passed it to Celine, saying, "There is medicine in here. Take 1 pill daily to improve your body's structure. Get more from me after you run out." Celine touched the palm-sized porcelain bottle, not knowing how to express his feelings. "Go read your books. I hope that you will continue to be this diligent in the future." "Yes, teacher." Celine answered, joy and cheer in his heart. He returned to his room, removed his boots, and took off his robe. He then threw the remaining gold coins on the table and took a breather. After being accepted by Jason, Celine was even more diligent. On the first day of each week, he was with Jason in the laboratory as he conducted magic experiments. Jason would explain the principles of magic relating to the experiments. On the 5th day of each week, he would enter the city to place orders and collect the materials he had ordered the previous week. He had placed Decca at the back of his mind. There was an underground bandit group in Ceylon City which had become a headache for the Lord. Celine had accepted the teachings from the books. Mages were detached from the outside world, and aside from when they were hired, they were not to interfere with the lives of ordinary people. In another half a year, Celine had mastered the 6th level, 0 magic alarm. This was an enchantment magic, and lasted for 2 hours with each release. Depending on the method of release, the resulting magic alarm could be either audible or inaudible. An audible alarm was beneficial for team protection as everyone could hear it. An inaudible alarm could only be detected by the mage themselves, and even the person who had triggered the spell would remain unaware. Chapter 9. Magic Pharmaceutics, Part 2. There were 2 reasons for Celine's slow progress. The first reason was that his lack of affinity to elements did not improve. Even though he had been taking the pills from Jason daily, he still was unable to perceive elements clearly. The second reason was that Celine would learn the next magic only after he had perfected the current one. That was to say, Celine could now skillfully carry out double release, as well as control the double release. He could continuously release 4 grade 0 spells, with the 4 spells being released separately, at the same time, or in sequence. When released in sequence, the last 3 spells were in an instantaneous state. Because of his innate deficiency, he needed to put in more effort on his skills. Celine believed that as long as the magic strings were formed, he would be a perfect magician. Through this 6 months of practice, Celine gradually knew that Jason's actual age and how old he looked were the same, 35 years old. It was very rare to have a 35-year-old grade 5 magician in the Qin Empire. Jason was not only talented, but also possessed formal magic lineage. His teacher was a grade 9 magician. Jason had left Qin Empire, because his practice was stuck in a bottleneck as he was about to progress to grade 6. As they advanced from grade 5 to grade 6, the magicians would form their own unique style. Only when they reached grade 7 could they develop the magic string to perfection. Jason was a very confident person, so he left the Qin Empire, away from his teacher's guidance. He had wanted to be a unique magician. Celine was lucky. A regular magician would not have the ability to provide so many magic books. Even if there were one may not have been able to carry them into Ceylon City. That required a large space prop. An ordinary space prop was only a few cubic feet, and would definitely not fit the books in these few rooms. Jason had traveled a long way, and came to Ceylon City when Celine had almost starved to death. Where Celine was concerned, this was a miracle of fate. Celine's earnest learning attitude was a good fit for Jason's temper. Celine was also smart enough, which was why Jason had decided to formally guide him after testing him a year later. A regular apprentice of magic would receive his teacher's guidance only after he had passed grade 6 apprenticeship. Celine had spent a year to attain the grade 2 apprenticeship. If it were other magicians, they would have long ago completely given up on him. This was because grades 1 to 3 apprenticeships were the simplest. Normally, they would enter grade 4 apprenticeship in the second year. Celine finally completed reading through the basic knowledge of magic. The bookshelves in the back began to contain more in-depth content on principles of magic. These could not be simply learned through memorization, and Celine started to make his choices. The principle of magic required a combination of brief understanding and Jason's guidance. For the rest of the time, aside from practicing new magic, he could also gain more knowledge: alchemy, magic pharmaceutics, magic array, summon skill, and so on. Summon skill was excluded by Celine, as this type of magic was extremely unstable. Too many possibilities could occur when summoning living creatures. It was said that during the Second Dynasty, magicians could arbitrarily summon the designated creatures. Unknowingly, the summon skill had become a type of random magic in the Third Dynasty, which was 5,000 years ago. During battle, the last thing Celine would want was to summon one grass-grazing rabbit after another. It could even be a housefly at times. Magic array was also abandoned. One needed powerful affinity to elements to learn magic array. Celine's learning had been hindered by this limitation. His body's magic elements were not even sufficient for him to create a grade 0 magic array. Between alchemy and magic pharmaceutics, Celine finally chose magic pharmaceutics. Although alchemy was profitable, it would be of little help in his own battle. After Celine understood the importance of power, he had planned for himself clear learning goals. He needed to become stronger, even stronger. Magic pharmaceutics was undoubtedly the most practical for Celine. Even the cheapest material could produce boosters. As long as one had sufficient mental strength to control the blending of the pharmaceuticals, the chance of failure would be reduced. After determining his direction, Celine started on the arduous learning process. To manufacture magic medicine, tens of thousands of materials could be used. They were mainly plants, with minerals making up 10%. The rarest of all were materials from living creatures, such as the blood, hair, and horn of a magic beast. Celine asked Jason for a set of equipment to be used to refine medicine, and built a small-scale laboratory in his bedroom. Celine's ancestral home was an aristocratic building with a fortress-like structure, such that explosions from experiments would not destroy the walls. This was the reason why Jason had eyed Celine's house. As he could continuously cast the reading magic 4 times, Celine's speed of learning had also quickened. He had used 3 months to memorize the tens of thousands of pages of material maps. During this time, he did not sleep and depended solely on meditation to recuperate his energy. After he was done with the material maps, Celine did not systematically learn the formulae. Beside the commonly used medication, he began to search for some rare formulae. On one day, Celine sat on the ground with his back against the bookshelf. He was reading Summary of Magic Pharmaceutics, when suddenly, he felt the top of his head throbbing. He looked up. A huge book came hammering down and landed on Celine's nose. Blood spluttered. Celine had not learned the invisible shield spell. He had read continuously for a long time and his energy was somewhat depleted. Even if he had felt danger, he could not hide. Oh! Celine covered his nose as he looked for the hemostatic agent in his pocket. This time, it was a hard smash and that book had weighed more than 10 kilograms. Celine felt that the bridge of his nose was almost broken. After he had tilted his head and applied medication, Celine felt a buzzing sound in his head and his vision became blurred. Could this be a symptom of a concussion as described in pathology? He had better not have knocked himself dumb. He picked up that thick book and held it in both hands. It felt unusually heavy. This book was almost squarish, a meter wide and half a meter thick. There were no words on its black cover, which was lined with dark golden patterns. Celine was pretty familiar with magic patterns. The pattern on this cover was very unfamiliar, and he could not tell which era's style it was. Opening the thick cover, on the title page was "Ridiculous Magic Pharmaceutics," written in Meyer's language. Celine was attracted by the book title. Magic pharmaceutics was a very normative science. It was very perfect from its principle to operation. Using the word "ridiculous" to describe magic pharmaceutics was an absurd notion. Flipping to the first page, the preface was handwritten by the Royal Organization. Celine turned to the back of the book, but could not find any writer's inscription. He then began reading from the beginning. This book's author had negated the structure of the magic pharmaceutics in his introduction, and deemed magic pharmaceutics as a skill of experience which had many loopholes in its guiding theory. Only through constant experiments could magic pharmaceutics continue to improve. Otherwise, it would lead to a dead end. Up to this point, Celine felt that the author was spouting nonsense and playing to the gallery. Magic pharmaceutics had a history of tens of thousands of years, even before magic formation. This author was definitely insane. However, he got more terrified as he read on. The author was able to pinpoint the error in the logic of magic pharmaceutics. The author pointed out that even the purest mineral could not possibly solely correspond to one element. It was even more so for herbal and animal materials. Magic medicine was invented according to the pharmaceutical formula in the magic pharmaceutics and was the most common medicine, but it was far from being formulated perfectly. The purification in magic pharmaceutics was an even bigger mistake, as the real development direction in magic pharmaceutics should be laboratory science. It should entail the investigation of magic to determine the structure of the pharmaceutical material, followed by continuous experimenting in order to achieve the perfect formula. There would be slight variations when using the same material in different places. A real pharmacist should be able to distinguish this. Celine continued to read on, and he discovered that not only was the author gifted in the magic pharmaceutics, but his accomplishments in magic were also pretty great. In the element agglomeration medicine, the author pointed out the mistake of this medicine and even gave 3 examples of 3 spells. He pointed out how to match with actual medicine when using the 3 spells, and eliminate the damage caused by the medicine. Celine had never heard of these 3 spells. Since they were advanced magic, he made use of reading magic to memorize them and keep them for future validation. However, Celine was getting a headache from looking at the formulae the author had provided. There were more than 600 kinds of basic materials. Alternatives were listed for more than 50 kinds, with the medicinal properties and analysis of the proportion for most included. Celine simply flipped to the front of the book and used the reading magic to memorize everything from the beginning. From afternoon till nightfall, by the time Celine was at the last page, he felt his eyelids twitching. The last page was written in magic language, in such small handwriting that it could hardly be read. Everything was in red as if it were a warning. Celine was so shocked by the minuscule title that his mind went completely blank, the formula of magic string medicine. In this world, 9 out of 10 people could become an apprentice of magic. But among 100 apprentices, only 1 or 2 could advance to being a qualified magician. This was because the formation of magic strings was too difficult. But the author of this book unexpectedly contributed a magic pharmaceutical formula. This formula could help apprentices form their magic strings. Celine thought that he was overly eager and hallucinating. He read it carefully again to ensure he had not read it wrong. This formula really was specially designed for creating magic strings. Regardless of the apprentice's grade, he would immediately form magic strings after taking this medicine. Celine's hands were trembling, his breathing became labored, and his nose was about to bleed again. It felt as though one had starved for half a month, and suddenly received a sweet-smelling bread. Celine sneakily sandwiched the book, Ridiculous Magic Pharmaceuticals, and returned to his bedroom. After careful thought, he felt that such formula was against nature and a little unrealistic. If magic strings could be formed through this method, then why did all the magicians not know this these tens of thousands of years? He cast a detection magic spell on the open page. Sure enough, a layer of golden words emerged among the red words. Celine broke into a cold sweat as he continued to read word by word. The golden words were the real formula for the magic strings. If one had consumed the medicine formulated according to the red words, even a grade 9 magic beast would die from the poison. Was the author joking? Someone so malicious would probably be hated when he was alive, which was why he had not left his name on the book. Chapter 10, Magic String Medicine, Part 1. The golden words that had recorded down the formula for the magic cord medicine listed the details. There were a total of 72 basic materials, with the attributes of each one listed in detail in the annotations at the back of the book. At the end of the formula, the author had included a sentence that made Celine wary. The magic cord medicine can change the body of a mage disciple and produce special magic cords, but this nature-defying method will cause the mage disciple to pay an unknown price. I hereby remind whoever takes this medicine that the price you pay will exceed whatever gains you get. The price you pay will exceed whatever gains you get. An unknown price. Celine hesitated. He had great respect for the author of this book, but he could not ignore the warning that they had left behind. What price would he have to pay? Death? Impossible. If any magic medicine had the potential to cause its user danger, the creator of the formula would make a detailed note of it. For example, the elderly should avoid it, junior mages should not consume it, those with heart conditions should not take it, and so on. Any side effects the magic medicine could result in would also be noted at the end. What could it be if it was not the threat of death? The author had used a severe cautionary tone in their warning. Celine could not figure it out. Besides death, what could be the heavy price that would accompany the formation of the magic cords? Celine searched his brain but still could not understand exactly what the author was hinting at. He closed the book and silently recited the names of the 72 types of materials, estimating the rough cost of it all. The cheapest material would cost only 1 silver coin, while the most expensive material would cost 200 gold coins. About 1,000 gold coins would be enough for a set of materials for the magic cord medicine. The gold coins Celine had were not enough for 3 sets of medicine materials. The formula did not include any mention of a success rate. Normally, the success rate of such a formula would be very low, not exceeding 10%. In terms of the configuration of magic medicine, there was no relation between the success rate and luck. Experience and mental power were more important. Celine had adequate mental power, but his experience was lacking. He had only 3 months' worth of knowledge on magic medicine. The success rate for producing even the easiest form of magic medicine was only about half. That cost only 1 gold coin's worth of materials, and Celine could accept the failure if it happened. Magic cord medicine was different, its failure would cost 1,000 gold coins. Ever since Celine had discovered this formula, he had never even thought of giving it up. He could not forget those days of poverty, not to mention the occasion when he had been behind bars and almost lost his life. If Jason had not arrived, he would have died in the prison. Jason would not appear every time. Therefore, he needed to possess his own power in order to live on. To become a genuine mage was the only path that Celine knew. However, he could not be excessively wasteful. Jason did not give him pocket money, so to get the materials for the magic medicine, he needed to think of ways to earn money. Where could he earn money? The bandit gang. Decca. Celine's eyes lit up. It had to be him then. For thieves to commit crimes, it was essential to have various medications. Regular equipment stores would not sell dangerous medication. To get the magic medicine that bandits required, they needed to know a familiar mage who was willing to help. Celine smiled. It seemed like a bad thing to know a bandit. A week later, when Celine was in the city, he left a message with the owner of the equipment store to look for a person by the name of Decca. Half a month later, he was in contact with the bandit. This time around, Decca did not ask why Celine had called for him, but simply waited for Celine to express his intentions. One should never play the fool with a mage. Last time, when Celine's message had been passed to the chief of the bandit gang, he had immediately abandoned his plan to rope in Celine. "I have magic medicine for sale." Celine did not beat around the bush. "Great, I shall take it," Decca replied without hesitation. "I do not trust your chief. Is there any way to kill him?" Celine's second sentence frightened Decca. "Celine, absolutely not. There are more than 20 of them," Decca replied hurriedly. "Last time, you mentioned a hideaway. I went back to check the books. There used to be a traditional practice. I am thinking, since you gather on the last day of every week, I have a kind of poison that can kill by just one touch. I will give you a week's time to consider it. If you are willing to do it, you will soon be the bandit gang chief of Ceylon City." Celine picked up his huge leather sack and left smiling. Would Decca reject his suggestion? If he rejected him, he would report to his chief what Celine had said. Then, he would probably need to face the anger of the mage. Decca did not dare reject Celine's suggestion. A month later, the soldiers of the city guard department discovered corpses at the hideaway. There were a total of 24 of them, and every one of them had died of a fatal poison. That was the first time Celine had killed, not by his own hands, but by his poison. The fake magic cord formula was indeed useful, and it caused immediate death for the targets. Celine was secretly fearful, reminding himself to be cautious of this method in future. Any sort of negligence could cost him his life. After getting rid of any foreign bandits, Decca quickly rounded up the bandits amongst the local youth. There were secured sales for Celine's magic medicine, and the gold coins increased each day. In a year's time, Celine had earned 3,000 gold coins in total. There was not a big market locally in Ceylon City. Decca was clever in that he customized Celine's medication for use by bandits. Besides the portion he used, a large quantity was sold to foreign lands. He had taken merely half a year to create a steady sales channel. The members of the neighboring bandit gangs all knew that there was special medication being sold in Ceylon City. Decca also earned a little from this. After accumulating over 5,000 gold coins, the standard of Celine's production of pharmaceuticals had improved by leaps and bounds. He finally reached grade 3 apprenticeship and could continuously release 5 level 0 spells. At the same time, he possessed 7 types of level 0 magic: reading magic, poison detection, acid sputtering, flame combustion, blending of elements, magic alarm, and detection magic. After boosting his health, Celine's body had also become stronger. Although he still looked a little thin and weak, he could now walk briskly while carrying a leather sack that weighed hundreds of kilograms. He had to go to the city to make purchases every week, and Jason always filled the large leather sack. The plan was approaching its final stage little by little. Celine could put together 3 sets of materials for magic medicine. Having inherited business acumen, Celine did not spend all of his gold coins, in case he was successful in his first few attempts. The weather was so stiflingly hot in the first week of June that it was sweat-inducing. Celine had just turned 15 years old and decided to start making the magic medicine. Celine felt uneasy. He had even wanted to kneel down to pray, except he did not have a faith. Despite the fact that the high priest of the Holy See had said there would be favoritism for those who showed provisional grace, Celine did not believe so, even deep in his bones. It would be easier to make the people of Qin Empire give up their pride than make the people of Psychikinya into believers. Celine pulled out the box from beneath his bed and dug out his family badge. The things that his father had left behind had all been sold. This was the only item that he had kept by his side. The shield-shaped black metal badge was palm-sized, extremely thick, and heavy. The dark green magic patterns represented that the family was the one and only, and had been designed by a great mage. Anyone that imitated this type of badge would be challenging the mage's dignity. Celine had understood the significance of this only after he had joined Jason. The badge was as thick as a thumb, with a deep lightning-shaped mark in the center. This deep mark had destroyed the completeness of the magic patterns. Hence, Celine could not deduce the identity of the mage who had designed the badge. A great mage had worked for the Metatron family. What an honor that must have been. Father, please bless me in becoming a powerful mage. Celine touched the badge and felt the uneven hidden patterns on its surface. There was another group of magic patterns which had been destroyed by the deep lightning-shaped mark in the center of the badge. Creak. Celine suddenly discovered that a touch of faint blue light had flashed deep within the lightning-shaped marks. He rubbed his eyes, but that tinge of blue had dissipated. What was that? Was it a magic imprint? His own family had declined this far, and even if there had initially been a magic imprint, it probably would have disappeared by now. Celine had some worries. The more books he read, the more he understood how wide and profound the world of magic was. Similarly, this world was full of danger. One's carelessness could result in them being smashed into pieces beyond redemption. Celine instinctively released detection magic at the badge. A faint light masked the badge in Celine's hand. Time seemed to have stood still. To Celine's panic, detection magic could actually be interrupted, like a person hovering mid-fall while falling off a cliff. This pause was not as long as a frame of time. If Celine had not already begun to grasp the principles of instantaneous magic and had not possessed astute mental power, he would not have noticed the pause. Then, the magic light that had enveloped the badge was sucked into the badge within an even shorter period of time. The power of the elements surged crazily towards the lightning-shaped mark in the center of the badge. The mobilization of elemental power of level 0 magic was not sufficient for such absorption. Celine felt that the hand holding the badge had become ice-cold, as though his elemental power, mental power, and blood had been drawn away in that moment. Emptiness. Celine's body immediately felt like an empty shell. His eyes became expressionless, his life was extinguished, and his heart stopped beating. Celine felt himself sinking into darkness. There was nothingness in his surroundings. It was colorless, soundless, scentless, nothing at all. Every memory from birth to his 15 years of age seemed to have disappeared. Was this death? Celine was left with this only thought, the purest response in the face of death. Celine's body fell backwards onto the floor. The blue light appeared again in the deep lightning-shaped mark on the badge in his hand. The fine, undetectable lightning did not enter through Celine's body, but entered directly into his heart. Celine's heart had stopped beating, but in that moment, it began to violently spasm from the sudden strike of the current. His blood was squeezed by the intense compressive force applied to all of his body. Bang! 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 Celine's body was revived and he regained his awareness. The nothingness in his surroundings had disappeared. Celine's body bounced up from the floor, nearly hit the ceiling, and then fell down heavily. This fall made his mouth and nose bleed. The blood was purple and contained clots. Celine could not describe the pain he was in. When his body had restored its awareness, all kinds of negative symptoms were felt throughout his body: weakness, pain, coldness, burning. These frightful feelings kept repeating over and over again. Aside from that first bounce in the beginning, Celine did not have any energy to struggle. He did not even have the strength to lift his fingers. He shut his eyes tightly, and his mind nearly broke